You know, the funny thing about the Russian Navy is that it is just so horrific that I can keep making more and more episodes. No, seriously, I have not even begun to scratch the surface yet. Like, we're not even there. So let's get onto it with a lesser known, but even more colossal Soviet screw up that once again was stopped by self sacrifice. It's time, after months of waiting, for K-19. Now, I should clarify, I called this boat the Widowmaker in Russian Navy Sucks Part 2. This is an after-the-fact invention to sell tickets to the Harrison Ford movie from 2002 that is not very accurate according to some nuclear-inclined people I've spoken to. The crew itself called it Hiroshima, after the city in Japan that got wiped out in a horrific nuclear explosion, because that's better than Widowmaker, I guess. Also, I'm aware I pronounce it nuclear, not nuclear. Now, I speak English, not English simplified, so for those that this particularly annoys, I recommend a teaspoon of cement or a strong whiskey. Either should suffice to keep you going through this experience while you listen to me pronounce English correctly. So, what is the K-19, and where did it come from? Well, in the late 50s, the Soviet Union was smack bang into the Khrushchev thaw after Stalin, and tensions were well and truly on the rise in Europe between NATO and the Warsaw Pact. It had become pretty clear at this point that if both sides engaged on land, NATO would have the nuclear edge. The great equalizer was the boomer. No, not that kind. Although when they get told no, they tend to blow up in the same way. Nuclear-armed submarines that could fire from a concealed position allowed the Soviets to truly threaten the continental United States, and in return, the US using these boats could ensure that the MAD, or mutually assured destruction, would occur if the Soviets fired first. And in 1957, when the K-19 was laid down, the West, it had a lead in the nuclear subs-arm race, and the Soviets, they needed to catch up quickly. You know where this is going, don't you? Now, what was life like for the crew on the early Soviet nuclear boomers? Well, the crews on the Soviet subs were actually treated pretty well. They were given a high-quality standard of food when compared to the general public, with smoked fish, sausages, fine chocolates, and cheeses, unlike the standard food given to crews, which is, it's not great. It's just not. You're going to soon see why. The bad luck started before K-19 even hit the water, before it was even finished being built. Multiple workers were killed during the submarine's construction, with 2 workers losing their lives when a fire. We'll get onto more fires later. 6 women being killed by fumes while gluing rubber lining to a water cistern. And to top off the construction, an electrician was crushed to death by a missile tube cover, and an engineer fell between 2 compartments and died. We're not even in the water, and the kill count on this one is racking up very quickly, isn't it? In an almost poetic turn of events, the Soviets decided to have a captain smash the ceremonial bottle of wine over the boat. The bottle of wine proceeded to slide along the propellers and bounce off the rubber-coated hull into the sea. In the business, we call this foreshadowing. Now, I'm going to do my best with the next part, and I thank the actual nuclear physicists and atomically inclined people in this community who have reached out and helped me a lot here. But word to the warning, some of this is going to be proper nightmare juice, so, just be ready. The first uh-oh moment occurred in January 1960, during a watch change ceremony, where improper operation of the reactor bent a control rod. This necessitated the reactor being dismantled, and the captain was very quickly demoted. I've asked 3 nuclear physicists and nuclear industry personnel how they bent a control rod. The responses I got were, it's the Soviets, they probably figured a way out how, and I have no fucking idea. That is a direct quote. So, these are people who work in the nuclear industry day to day, and they have no idea how they managed to bend that control rod so well. But it is what it is. The submarine would now conduct some tests, including her sea trials. So she tried a full power run on the 12th of November 1960. The submarine then surfaced, and the crew found that most of the hull's rubber coating had fallen off, so they needed to put some more on. During a maximum depth test dive down to 300 meters or 980 feet, flooding was reported in the reactor space. The captain ordered the submarine to surface as fast as possible, where a distinct list was noticed to port. Turns out that during the construction, a gasket was not replaced by workers, and the galley crew disposed of wood crates through the waste system, clogging it. This caused flooding in the 9th compartment. Because, that's what you do with the crate that you want to get rid of. You stick it down the drain. Later, in December 1960, a loss of coolant was caused when the main circuit pump failed, and specialists were called in from Severodonetsk. The boat was now finally commissioned on the 30th of April 1961 with a total of 139 men aboard. All that happened before it was even accepted into service into the Soviet Navy, so we're going well. We're going well on this one. As a side note, upon commissioning, the executive officer was Vasily Arkhipov. He would later be the sole reason a nuclear torpedo wasn't fired at the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis, which would have most definitely sparked a nuclear exchange. Arkhipov is one of those examples of extreme competency, right up there with Roshesvensky, in the middle of a nightmare. Speaking of nightmares, we're here. It's time to never sleep again. On the 4th of July, 1961, in the middle of her first patrol, having already killed 10 workers during construction, shedding her rubber skin and bending a control rod, the engineers on board noticed that there was something mildly alarming. There was a loss of coolant in the reactor. Now, I have been informed that this is in fact a bad thing to occur when nuclear fuel is allowed to start to get very hot. The reactor was immediately shut down, but now decay heat still exists, and I'm going to explain this as best as I can with the help of a lot of people, so thank you very much. So based on multiple figures, and they're using sort of Western reactors here, but it's nuclear physics, and I've been told that it all sort of works similar in the sense that decay heat is decay heat. So, decay heat still exists even though the reactor's shut down, and it is about 1/3 of the reactor's thermal power when on load and it starts to shed. Now, according to a nuclear-brained person, they said that the reactor on 1/3 would have had the thermal equivalent of about 9,000 average homes without cooling. Just to head off the expected comments when it comes to the relating power mentioned above for decay heat, thermal energy does not translate 1-to-1 with electrical energy. In reality, if you did, then the 23 megawatts would be enough for 9,000 homes. But as an example, a reactor at 1/3 power is about 9,000 homes worth of electricity, according to unclassified Soviet things. So, whether or not this is all true, we don't exactly know, because the Soviets, well, they're kind of known for classifying stuff, especially when it's bad. So, it's about 9,000 homes worth. So, either way, to make sense of it, even when you turn the reactor off, it's full of spicy juice, basically. That will kill you. Long story short, there's now a bit of an issue going on. Some reports state that the reactor got up to about 850 degrees Celsius during the processes of this incident. For comparison's sake, this is about the same temperature the top layer of cheese is on a pie after 30 seconds in the microwave. These kind of temperatures would have definitely damaged the outer cladding on the reactor fuel, and at the very least, it is likely that a partial meltdown occurred. The reactor itself was right on the edge of a meltdown though. Cladding, by the way, exists primarily to prevent cross-contamination and cool the fuel. At this point, it was becoming somewhat clear to the crew that things aren't exactly going well, and they were indeed up the proverbial creek without a paddle, and there was a very big hole in the canoe, shooting out enough gamma rays to create the communist equivalent of the Hulk. The crew tried to call Moscow, but that didn't work because the long-range radio had been broken by a separate incident earlier in the voyage. Because of course it had been broken, because this is the Soviet Navy. At this point, the radioactive steam that Wiki and many accounts go on with starts, well, floating around. This is most likely due to, and again I'm using somebody way smarter than me in this stuff to explain it, the fuel cans beginning to fail, meaning that you were getting fission products and fuel making direct contact with the water in the compartment and turning very quickly into spicy steam. It becomes really bad that the main ventilation loop for the boats, like air to breathe and stuff, was in the same room. Now this isn't too uncommon with subs, but it isn't exactly a normal thing to do to turn the reactor compartment into the seventh circle of hell. To quote two people from the nuclear industry I've spoken to, the whole sub was, as they say, shit up. Right about now, on the K-19, if you aren't using a respirator, you're in a bit of trouble due to the radiation, in the sense that your insides are going to start turning into goo. This next bit, well, it's that old Soviet adage of horrific human sacrifice being the only way for the state's crappy decisions to be made up for. K-19's engineering team went inside the reactor space, and they bodged in a repair job to get coolant feed back into the reactor and to prevent a complete meltdown on the boat, and from, making Greenland become glow Greenland. The engineers were able to retrofit an air valve to work and to move the feed water back into the reactor to finally cool it down, but in doing so they effectively signed their own death certificate. Not a single member of these heroes would survive, beyond a month, and to put that in perspective, the operators from Chernobyl Reactor 4, not all of them survived, but still quite a few did, and the ones that died, in many cases they lasted longer than this crew. The K-19 reactor compartment was so irradiated that some of the engineers were dead from acute radiation syndrome, ARS, in just 6 days. 6 days. And I was going to explain briefly what ARS is, and that was going to be some real nightmare juice, but YouTube won't let me upload that. So if you ever want to never, if you ever have an issue with sleeping too much and you just never want to sleep again, Google what acute radiation syndrome does. You may not want to do that in hindsight, but just it's a thing. Over the next 2 years, a further 15 crew members would succumb to the extreme levels of radiation aboard. The captain, having averted turning Greenland into a glow stick, did the most sensible thing he could and made for an area where he knew there would be a diesel boat on patrol. Nearby warships from the US Navy reached out and were like, bro, you okay there? You're kind of glowing. The Soviet commander decided to say everything was fine and refuse American help. It is understandable considering the Hotel Class K-19 was technically, ignoring the fact that this thing is at this point is a literal death trap, the most advanced vessel in the Soviet fleet. Now K-19 met up with the S-270, and the crew was moved off the boat onto the diesel sub, and the death trap was put under tow back to the Soviet Union. Now if you had a submarine that had already killed 10 people in construction, and then turned a portion of the crew into radioactive goo, would you maybe want to get rid of it, retire it, could even turn part of it into a memorial, research what went wrong with it? No. This is the Soviet Union. You put that baby back into service within 2 years after cutting out the reactor and contaminating miles and miles of surrounding area. K-19 was now nicknamed Hiroshima by the crew and was put straight back into service in 1963. The murder boat would serve out the rest of her career quietly and safely. I'm just kidding, this ride is not over yet. Weirdly, the nuclear incident that made the sub famous wasn't actually the deadliest thing to happen on that boat. On the 15th of November at 7:13 in the morning, K-19 collided with the Permit-class nuclear attack submarine USS Gato in the Barents Sea at the depth of about 60 meters or 200 feet. K-19 blew her ballast and reached the surface. The impact completely destroyed the bow sonar systems and mangled the covers of the 4 torpedo tubes. K-19 returned to port and rejoined the fleet. USS Gato was fine and continued its patrol. We're still going. Believe me, I want this one to end too, but the horror show, it's still coming. On February 24th, 1972, the boat again caught fire. And now this was at a depth of about 120 meters or 390 feet below the surface. And this is about 1,300 kilometers or 700 nautical miles off Newfoundland in Canada. The boat surfaced, and the crew was evacuated to surface warships nearby, save for the 12 men trapped in the aft torpedo compartment. Towing was delayed due to weather, and the rescuers could not reach the men due to the conditions of the engine room. The fire killed 28 sailors outright, and a further 2 after they were evacuated. The fire was caused by hydraulic fluid that wasn't contained correctly, dripping into a hot filter. K-19 was again repaired and put back into service. On the 15th of November 1972, you're never going to guess what happened. Well, another fire broke out in compartment 6, but thankfully the fire extinguisher actually worked this time and nobody died, which is a tremendous surprise that no one was dead from this one. On the 15th of August 1982, another electrical fault caused another fire, severely burning 2 sailors, one of which would later die 5 days later. Finally, In 1990, the submarine was finally decommissioned and towed to Nerpa in Murmansk to be scrapped. K-19 had finally stopped killing, but her story isn't over yet. A section of the submarine was purchased by an ex-crew member, Vladimir Romanov, who wanted to turn it into a Moscow-based meeting place to build links between submarine veterans from Russia and other countries. Naturally, those who had survived Hiroshima weren't a fan of this, so he and I kid you not, turned it into his place of residence in northwest Russia. I don't even know anymore. I don't understand. Why are they like this? But that, my friends, was part 4. If you enjoyed it, please do like, comment, and subscribe. Join our Discord crew, and I will catch you next time. The next video will probably non-Soviet or Russian because I have been working on a demon of an essay about the fall of the Soviet Union and I just want something competent to deal with. I'll probably talk about the Royal Navy because they won't hurt my head as much, they'll be kinder to me.